Reverend Brian Akers here, and this is It's Really Real, and we're just getting ridiculous today. So, in a world that is so super serious all the time, you have to take moments to just bring levity into the situation, and we've got a great, what I think will be light and not so light conversation today. And joining me today is one of my favoriteest humans. So you guys have seen me interview her sister, Leah Pekowski, and
That's me.
Yeah, or excuse me, that's you. Jeez. Jenna Pekowski, and Leah Pekowski isn't even you because you're Leah Moore now. And so you guys have seen me do an interview with her husband, Randy Moore, that was equally as ridiculous as I imagine this conversation is going to be. Leah has been a member of the spiritual community that I'm now the spiritual leader of, since she was a teenager. And is a blogger and a writer, a fantastic writer, by the way. And so we'll make sure that you have the information to check out her work in the comments below. And so, Leah Moore, introduce yourself to the people.
Hello. Yes, I am Leah Moore. I was about to start introducing my job title because I have calls with companies all the time where I'm like, I'm Leah Moore. I'm from blah, 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 blah. But that is not how I want to define myself today. So, big Hamilton fan. Big music, pop culture, astrology. I was looking at tarot cards today. We can get into that later. But fan, yeah, and writer and reader and joyful human looking to bring other humans joy.
Awesome. And I love your whole family. One of these days we're gonna have to do a thing where we just get the whole crew on. That would be
so fun.
Oh my gosh. So but also part of the reason I love you guys so much is because I think you have that capacity to balance these really deep and intense moments and experiences and conversations, and you have the ability to be so ridiculous. And I think that the way you guys manage that together is just so beautiful and fun, and I love it so much. And so today we've decided we've got some topics on the back burner if we need them, but I'm not sure that we're going to need them, because today we are talking about the musical, the Broadway musical of Hamilton. So Hamilton was released on Disney Plus this month, and I had never seen it, right? So I'm one of those guys that was like, everybody's talking about it, and I'm like, not hating on it, but just kind of hating on the fact that it's like, it seemed like a really elitist thing for a really long time, because it was so expensive, so challenging to get to be able to be someone who saw it. And so I didn't listen to any of the music. I didn't look into, I didn't read anything about it. I literally ignored it. And I told myself, I'm going to ignore this thing until it's accessible to me. Right. And I think a lot of people might have felt that way.
Oh, yeah.
You know what? Like this Hamilton craze, whatever, plus it's American history. So people are like, how good could it be? I was one of those people anyways. And I'm here to admit that I was stupid because it is magical. I have currently, as of today, seen it 9 times, and it's a long show. But Leah has seen it in person. And I think you saw it with a majority of the original cast, but not the whole original cast?
Only like a little tiny bit. So we saw it with the original George Washington. So Chris Jackson was in it.
He's one of my favorite.
Yeah, incredible. Like, I was so excited to see him. And Oak, who plays James Madison, and Hercules Mulligan. So we saw the original.
Nice.
And some of the ensemble was some of the originals as well.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah, we saw it in October of 2016. So it had been like around for a while, but still like relatively new. And I think I started listening to the soundtrack. I was trying to remember, like, in preparation for this conversation. So I want to say probably January of 2016. It's actually at a CSL winter camp. Was talking to some of my friends about it who are big theater people.
Had you seen the show yet by then?
No.
Okay.
No, so they just had been listening to the soundtrack and were like, you need to listen to it. Like, and I had read an article, actually, I believe in Vogue. I've subscribed to Vogue for like years and years and years. Just because I like I love fashion.
Time
I
caller,
love the
long
pop
time
culture stuff.
subscriber.
Well, and I love magazines in general. Like, that's kind of one of my things. And I love that Vogue is one of the ones that actually like is very well written. I feel like I get frustrated with some other ones. So as a writer, I like it, and like aesthetically. But anyway, so I read an article about Hamilton and that it was like a hip hop musical about American history. And my first thought was like, Randy would love it. Which is so funny because he's like, he's not anti-musical, but not like a huge musical guy. But I just like thinking about those things and reading about the way that they described it. I was like, oh yeah, he'd be super into it. So then I started listening to the soundtrack, and I probably listened to it nonstop for like a couple months at least.
Well, I remember that era.
Yeah.
Because you were like, every time I saw you were talking about, you were like, you have to listen to, you would love it so much. I don't know why you haven't listened to, but I was in that weird like, man,
Also, the cool thing about it is like it's one of the shows where the soundtrack has almost the whole thing. So like you can get the full picture of the story by just listening to the soundtrack. Which I think actually makes it slightly more accessible in that way, even though it was really hard to get tickets, because like these shows like Dear Evan Hansen, which is like a huge phenomenon also, I've listened to the soundtrack and like you don't get the whole story. So I'm like, I don't understand why this is a big deal. I mean, I understand that like the music's good and whatever, but like,
well, and rhyme saying has always been storytelling, right? So like if you're gonna make a rhyme sayer musical, you're not gonna let anybody talk. Like there's never gonna be any talking. It's all going to be lyrically enhanced, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
And I remember those times because you were like rocking it till the wheels fell off, and I was like, man, you know, and I don't know, I had that weird resistance to it. And so for my part, the very first time I ever saw a musical, my then girlfriend, now wife, took me to see Wicked at the Pantages in Los Angeles. And so I had seen musicals, but I'd never been to a full-scale production. So I was excited because I really had heard it was such an amazing show. I had heard a couple of the songs and I was just like, that's really cool. And then the premise, embedding it into something that is a zennial for me was like a huge part of my youth, which was the embedding it into the Wizard of Oz, really made it like, okay, fine, let's give it a shot. Let's go. And I promise you, I've not been the same human since that day because that musical was so good. And I was like, I want this all the time. And so since then, Kimberly and I went to see Book of Mormon, which I had a similar feeling to. People were talking about it. And it was the South Park guys. And even then I was like, no, like, I don't know. And then when it was finally accessible and they were playing it here in Baltimore, Kimberly and I were excited. My wife was raised in the Salt Lake City greater area and stuff. And I died. I was like, if musicals can be like this, I'll go to every musical ever. And then I took Mackenzie down to Baltimore to see Lion King. And so, and then when I saw that one, I was like, okay, cool. So not all musicals are created equal. And people had raved about it. And I was like, but she had a blast. Like she had such a blast.
Oh yeah.
And so I'm like I'm into musicals now, but I'm not like a musical, like I haven't been watching musicals forever. And I think Rent is an abomination. And yeah, I know Rent has like, I know every time I say that to a musical theater person, I think it's just a really grimy, codependent, like it really just kind of like glorifies a lot of things that maybe don't need to be glorified, right? And it could have brought attention to those issues without, I don't know,
well,
personal.
It's also, I mean, it's not old, but it's like older. So like I don't have the context of like when it came out to fit that into. But
so what's your like experience of musicals leading up to before you saw Hamilton?
So so my mom growing up lived in a household where they put on musical soundtracks. Her dad was a big musical guy. So yeah, so it runs in the family. And I've been in musicals and plays and whatever since I was like 8. So yeah, So I enjoy them. I wouldn't say I'm like a huge musical person to the level of like some of the people that I know.
I know exactly what you're talking about. I think
Yeah.
anybody watching this would know too.
Yeah. So
It's
I'm
like
definitely
being
not
into
there.
baseball and then meeting somebody who's like into baseball.
Yeah,
I
which I'm not. But the shows that I do love, I love. Like Chicago is one of my absolute favorites, although we did go to see a high school version of it and it was so uncomfortable. Like high school.
saw it too. So
But
the local high school that's really known for their performative arts program put it on, and I've kind of felt similarly. And I'm sitting next to like a 12-year-old kid, and the whole time I'm like, oh my.
yeah, he was loving life,
Yeah.
which like good for
We
him.
were together when we saw that show.
High key uncomfortable. Yeah.
We were totally together when we saw
Yes,
that show.
I think I was like behind you, but yeah. So that was.
But I do love that show. How did you
Um,
feel that the movie did the show? Do you think it did it
So
justice?
my experience, and that is also the thing, is that my experience with a lot of these shows has been the movie. So Rent, the movie came out like when I was in high school, so I was obsessed, obviously. And then Chicago, I saw the movie. Like I haven't seen. No, I saw Rent at Toby's actually, but I've never seen Chicago on stage, which I would love to.
Sans the high school awkward one.
Yes. Oh, right. So, okay. So technically I have seen it, but it was like junior or whatever. But no, so I've actually only seen 2 shows in New York. I saw Hamilton, and which like was the best day of my life, literally, because so like I bought tickets in March to go see Hamilton in October. So I've been like planning for months and months. Hadn't been to New York in a while. Really the first time I've been to New York to like walk around with Randy. And then we saw the show, and then actually at intermission of the show found out one of my best friends had gotten engaged. So I was super excited. And then after we got back to the hotel after the show, I got engaged. So yeah, basically best day ever.
Best day ever.
Yeah, so I have like a top three best days ever. That's definitely number 1. And then number 2, number 3, unsure what order necessarily, was obviously like our wedding day. And then last summer I got to meet the Backstreet Boys. So,
So there you go.
Like,
that tells you a little something about what makes the top 3 list for Leah Moore.
Yes. I mean, it's the Backstreet Boys. Like,
I mean,
loves of my life since long before I knew Randy. So, to be fair.
There's a couple of Dodger players that are similar for Kimberly and I.
Absolutely. Totally.
Yeah.
So, and then the other show I saw in New York was in high school, our theater department took a trip, or like our theater class, maybe. I don't know. In high school, we took a trip, and I saw Shrek the Musical, which was awesome. And there is actually a recording of it. I don't know if it's still there, but it was on Netflix. So, also accessible. And it was a recording of the stage play, or a stage musical. So it wasn't like a movie per se, but just like the actual show. So that's awesome. I loved it. And then I've also seen Wicked and Book of Mormon at the Kennedy Center in DC. Book of Mormon blew my mind. Like I was not ready to love it.
I didn't know a theatrical production could do that, right? Like
it was so good. And literally, so like I knew it was going to be funny and it was hilarious, but like the singing and the dancing was unreal. The dancing literally alone was like so
and also
good.
You kind of factor in like the storytelling, right?
Yeah.
The storytelling and the way that the because those guys have a really great way of confronting morality and those kinds of things, and the fact that they made such a definitive point before it was all done, I thought was masterful work. Yeah, it's one of my favorite. It's such a good show in general, and I think, and maybe I'll ask you this question too. My biggest regret is that Kimberly and I did not go see Waitress while Jason Mraz was in the cast.
I would love to see that. That's one that like I also haven't even really listened to the soundtrack, but like after I was listening to something else. Oh, I was listening to Leslie Odom Jr.'s album, like not show tunes, but he's Aaron Burr in Hamilton. So I was listening to his album, and then like Spotify just plays stuff afterward, and one of the songs from Waitress was on it, and I was like, this is so good, I should just listen to it.
Do you have any regrets? Is there any show that you wish you would have seen, or there's somebody that you wish you would have seen in a show when it was running with them in it?
Definitely. So speaking of Chicago, Usher was Billy Flynn in Chicago on Broadway, and I would have loved to see that.
All day.
Yeah.
All day.
Definitely.
Awesome. So that brings us to today.
Yeah.
So the thing, and that conversation about like the movies, did the movies do them justice? What was the one with Moulin Rouge? Did you see the movie, the film of Moulin Rouge?
Yeah.
So here's those. There's three pieces to what I'm about to say. So or actually four. So there's Moulin Rouge, which was so insanely abstract in the way that they put it together in film, right? Like it was so like over the top, and I enjoyed that.
Oh yeah.
And then you had Chicago, which was really a cinematic presentation of the stage play.
Yes.
And then you have like Shrek and others that I've seen, or like the live things that they've been doing on different networks, where it's really just like watching the stage play as a stage play. Hamilton is like both. So I did some research, and I found out that the footage that was used there, even though they put a very specific show date, that show date is where the live audience film was captured, but they also had two separate filming dates with an empty theater so that they could get those super cool close-up shots, so that they could get like the overhead stuff and like all the different work that they did. And so I felt like when I watched Hamilton on Disney Plus, the way that they put that together was that it was like the best of all worlds. I felt like I was in the audience and watching the show, so it still played very much as a stage show. So it was a movie, like it was definitively being produced and put together on stage. And I got all the intimacy that you get out of being able to watch like a cinematic presentation of it.
Yes.
So I thought that alone like deserves like recognition. Like that's a thing that like every musical should consider doing from now on.
Yeah. It's incredible. Even like for purchase or rent or whatever, like even like if it's not totally free, which I guess this is not totally free, but well, it's free for me right now because I pay for unlimited on Verizon, so I have a year of Disney Plus for free. But yeah, so as someone who has seen Hamilton in real life, I spent an exorbitant amount of money on tickets, and our seats were literally against the wall, so we were like as far away from the stage as you could possibly be and still be in the theater. And so I still got the experience. You could still hear everything, obviously, and you could still see, and you could see the choreography, which is really like, I think what sets it apart from just listening to the soundtrack for me is the choreography.
It's so brilliant. The turntable and like the play on the turntable as being a hip hop staple. Like it's
I know, it's like mind blowing. So much good choreography. But yeah, but with the show, or I mean with the movie, being able to like actually see like the nuanced acting in it, like of people's faces, and like, and it's interesting to hear the differences because now I've listened to the soundtrack like 1 million times. So like, so I know it very well. And so hearing like the differences in inflection that they like chose at different times has been cool. But yeah, I really think like you're right about like just like the close-ups and like the way that they put it together. It is phenomenal, and it's a different experience from seeing it.
The moment that really like made that poignant for me, where I was already feeling like, whoa, this is a different kind of experience. Like as I'm watching it, it was not, for me, the first viewing was like, right? And so, but the thing that first caught my attention about like the distinction of seeing it as a stage play and depending on where you are in the theater, versus being able to have those up close films is when he does his first, when he does, I'm not throwing away my shot. And I think it's actually like the tail end of Aaron Burr and the beginning of My Shot. And when he takes over from the trio and kind of introduces himself, and he says the line where he says, I shoulder every burden. And like in the version that's filmed, he does this like Like just a small, like, and it did like that little subtlety is like, what a cool thing to be able to experience in the way he's trying to present himself on stage, and to be able to get the advantage of film to catch that so perfectly. You know, it's like my dad always used to say, because until I got here to Maryland, I had never been to a football game, and I'd been exposed to so much football in my life. My dad is a huge football fan. And my dad would always say, like, why would we pay all that money to go to a football game when we have the best seat in the house, right? And so this really kind of has jaded me, because when I went and saw Wicked, I mean, it's Wicked, so it wasn't cheap. And we were in the Pantages, which is an older theater, gorgeous theater. And so we were underneath the balcony and only about like 4 rows away from the wall. And so it was cool, but it was like, and when we saw Book of Mormon, we were on the edge of the balcony, maybe second row at the balcony, like looking over it all. And so your perspective dramatically affects the experience that you have of a stage play.
Yeah.
Like it just really does.
Yeah, like I wonder if, so one of the really most impactful things, like when we saw Hamilton live, that like made an impact on me as different from just listening to the soundtrack, was like Hurricane and like the last duel, where like the turntables happening, and like, so being at the top, it probably was different than like if you were sitting like behind the orchestra. Just being able to see like where everyone's placed and how it's moving, and like those are so cool.
Well, yeah, and like I'm sure like
that I remembered was in one of the reprises of You'll Be Back, where he says, "I'm so blue," and he stamps his foot and it turns blue. For some reason, that was like one of the things that I was
good.
Like, unexpected, but loved it.
I thought, you know, all the questions come, like when you fall in love with a show like this, like all the questions, like, which character am I most like, and which character, if I had the chops to pull it off, which character would I want to play, and like
I already know.
Stuff. Oh yeah, so tell me.
Oh, definitely Angelica. So Jenna and I have had this conversation, and we're both very torn between Angelica and Eliza. And then like at the same time, we were both like, but I was like, I'll be Angelica, and she's like, I would be Eliza. Like at the same time. So I'm like, perfect.
Makes total sense. Yeah. Oh, and Kimberly is clearly Eliza. Like there's no even, like, you can't even get any way around it. And so at first I was like, the first half of the show, I'm like, I am Alexander fucking Hamilton, right? Like, and then the second half of the show, I was like, please don't compare me to fucking Alexander Hamilton. And then I've been discussing it with my friends, and one of my friends is like, dude, you're John Lawrence. And I was like, and the more I thought about them, I was like, and from a hip hop standpoint, I really identified with Hercules, because I like that. You know, like I'm a Busta Rhymes fan. Like I like that gritty, grimy. When I was young, I was listening to like Black Sheep and like all these obscure hip hop bands that like people out in California where I was had never even heard of, right? And so, you know, from his first rap, from the moment that he starts rapping, I was like, I love you. And so I could totally be him. But I think the character I would have the most fun trying to portray on stage is the king, like King George III. Like I think I could pull that off in a really fun, and so I do. So, you know, here's me in the shower, I'm listening to You'll Be Back, and I'm like, I'm taking, and that's another thing that's kind of cool too, is you see the way that they do it. And like you were talking, even them, the original cast, between when you see them do little stuff like when they did it at the White House, when they do it on the soundtrack, when they did it in the Disney Plus version, when you saw it, and when I've seen all these other different smatterings of performances that they've done, like they're so dramatically different every time, because the inflection and stuff kind of comes organically to them. Yeah. And so I'm like, okay, it's hard to get out of that lane. So I've seen it 9 times now. And I'm bitter because I'm trying to hit that double digit slot, and I'm looking at my calendar like, when am I going to hit number 10? Because I just want to watch it again, and all I do is listen to the soundtrack. But
I feel like tonight
to the characters the way you first see them. I do. Let me put it that way. I get married to the characters the way that I first see them. So for me to see a different cast is going to be weird, and I can't wait to do it, right? Like I can't wait to enjoy those people's interpretation. So when I interpret the king, like I'll be in the shower and I'll be singing You'll Be Back, and like I imagine like if I was playing an insane colonial monarch, like how would I play it? And like all kinds of fun in there. So who So you think you're Angelica. If you were in the show, who would be the most fun person to play? Would it also be Angelica? Like, is that like just like?
Yes. Or, I mean, Thomas Jefferson is my favorite character. So, and it's like, okay, so my favorite songs kind of like change over time, but I think like kind of now over the years, like I've kind of honed in on like top 3. So Schuyler Sisters, because like the harmonies are so good, and like I just love
the closing like piece where the closing piece that they do, where there's like all 3 of them just full-blown diva into oblivion, and it's like a run, but all of them are running in different harmonies. I'm like,
and like, so he changed it for them after they were cast, and he heard them harmonizing together. He was like, oh yeah, we're gonna tie this in. So I know a lot of things because of this. The Hamilton. That was the prop I needed to go get. So this is literally an annotated like script, basically. I will let you borrow it, yes. It's so cool. So, I mean, you can like, oh, and someone on Twitter was like, oh, you should read through while you watch, which like I haven't done yet, but
that sounds
but reading it was awesome because you get all the little like, oh, like 10 Dual Commandments is based on 10 Correct Commandments, which like I didn't initially know because I'm not like a huge hip hop buff or whatever. But then you get little things like where he said, where have you been? And he's like, France. That was an ad lib. He ad libbed that and then they kept it. So like you get little snippets of stuff like that, and it's so cool. But anyway, okay, so top 3 are Schuyler Sisters, Yorktown, which I don't even know why. I think I just get super hype. Like I think it's like
here comes the general.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and it has the part where he's like, Hercules, Mulligan, you know, the best part. And then what did I miss? Just because like it's so good.
Because you're such a huge fan of his character too, and it's just so like they slapsticky it so well because he, you know, what Lin-Manuel does right there is he really kind of puts like in that era to be in France isn't to be in France and do something like this with people and keep up like the for news to travel and for people to keep up with what's going on the planet in that era is just such a wildly different thing. And because that style of that song kind of melodically moves from like a vaudeville kind of like hey, ooh, hey, like kind of like a circus act almost, right? And hip hop all in the same time is really so good. I think my 3 favorite performers. So I think that's another thing too, right? Yeah. Which is like, who are your favorite performers? And it's so hard. It's so hard. So,
they're all so good.
Every member of the original cast is unbelievably stunning. So I have to say that before I go like picking favorites, right?
But Daveed Diggs though.
Daveed Diggs is like just absolutely, in my opinion, ran the show. Like, and so he's being the narrator, so he already has that. But the way that he stewards it, no, not Daveed Diggs. Sorry, I was talking about Odom.
Leslie Odom Jr.
Yeah, so Leslie Odom Jr. Sorry, so you are a Daveed Diggs number 1.
Oh,
I'm a Leslie Odom number 1. So the way he, like when he sings "Wait for It," and especially in the Disney Plus version, where you can really see like the depth of internal rage that's having to like manage itself and compose itself, he just did so, and it humanized hit that human historically. Because I think historically he's always just been cast as a piece of garbage, and that's not really true to his actual intentions. Like he is, you know, he was always the Fairweather fan, and he never really, you know, all of those things are accurate, but like to humanize him in that way, especially at the end when he kind of talks about like, I have to live, like I lived in the modern history of when it was being made, of being the guy that shot this dude.
Yeah, he said, there is a line, he says, now I'm the villain in your history.
And so it's just so he's my number 1 performer.
Yeah, he's amazing. You should listen to his album if you haven't listened to it yet.
Oh, so yeah, so when you said that just now, I was like, what? I mean, I just discovered the mixtape.
Yes, so I just re-listened to that yesterday so that I could talk about it today too.
Well, because we'll get there. We'll get there. So, but with with like who's number, like from there on, I don't know, like it changes depending on the mood I'm in, because Washington I can't. I'm still learning the actors' names, but
Yeah,
so the guy who plays Washington is so good.
yeah,
The
Chris.
guy who plays John Lawrence and Philip is
So
his
fun
voice.
fact about him, he went to school in New York with a friend of mine that I went to high school with. So they went to the American Music and Dramatic Academy, I think that's what it's called, AMDA, in New York. And so, and because he's my age, so yeah, my friend John knows him. It was cool.
Wow. So you're 2 degrees from John Lawrence.
Yeah,
What's the actor's name? Do you know the actor's name? Just John
yeah,
Lawrence?
Anthony Ramos.
Anthony Ramo. The tenor of his voice is some of the smoothest R&B I've ever heard in
He
my life.
has an album too.
Ah! You're ruining me. My wife is gonna hate this show
No,
when
she'll
I'm
love
done.
it. The albums are good. She'll like them.
Yeah, no. She digs. She didn't like the mixtape, she had said, and I was like, "Are you kidding?" And because it was one of her friends that put me onto it, she was like, "Yeah, you like that? I listened to it. I didn't really like it." And I'm like, "Well, you're not really a hip hop fan." She's like, "Yeah, I guess." And then like a week later, she's like, "Oh my gosh, how come you didn't tell me that the mixtape was so good?" In tongue in cheek, right? Um, but and we'll get back to the mixtape in a minute. So those two characters vocally are and just their performance is so good to me. And then like I said before, from a hip hop standpoint, if there was one of them that I'd want to hear rap a lot, it would be Hercules Mulligan.
Yeah.
Like the grimy, like even when he comes back in Yorktown and he's like, what? Like that whole like that the bravado of it all and the like that, all of that just makes me like ah because like when they were doing that number, I was like where's her? And I knew that he was kind of a more minor player in the role, but the whole
we know that this plan would work. We had a spy on the inside. That's
right. And he comes out and Hercules and everybody's like, yo, and he kind of busts out. And I'm like, oh, there he is. And he was a spy. So the whole point was for him to be not around. The whole point was for you to have no idea what he was doing so that when he came back, you were like, my man.
He's selling some pants.
Well, and to make him such an integral part of the victory, right? To really make it, to like ensure that even in the absence of all of the like being out there in the trenches, which they brought up a lot, right? That like it didn't diminish the depth of importance and value of his role in the dynamic historically, right? And it really from a production standpoint, I think made him like even more like like when he came back, I was just like I was hyped. I hopped up off the couch an inch, right? I was like, yes.
Oh yeah.
It was so good. So I would say that definitely Odom is my. I think that the way that he played Aaron Burr and his vocals and his stage command and his, like his presence is just so powerful. And then Washington and Lawrence are kind of like, I think Washington is just so much more prevalent in the show that I'm able to be more into him, because I do feel like when it switched from the first act to the second act and John Lawrence had passed, that I felt very differently about his portrayal of Philip, and that I was cool. I was good with it. Like I loved it, but I'm not endeared to it the way that I was endeared to his John.
Yeah.
Right.
If I ever skip songs on the soundtrack, it's Blow Us All Away and It's Quiet Uptown. I literally am can we get back to politics, please?
Yes. Yes.
That's immediately. I feel like crying today.
Yeah.
But,
well, and the like, so, okay. So who are your three, like, as far as like performers? So obviously Daveed Diggs, obviously.
I know.
Come on, these are hard-hitting questions.
I know. Okay, so the problem is that all three of the women, like, literally could be my top three because they're so good, especially like vocally in particular. Because, okay, let me tell you a story. So when we went to go see it live, I really had to pee, which is the story of my life. You can ask anyone who knows me, and you've been in this situation before. So, literally story of my life. So luckily I had listened to the soundtrack 1 million times and knew exactly what was coming. So during the I literally, what is it even called? Oh, this would be enough. That would be enough or whatever. Oh, know, the one where they're just like sitting. They're literally just sitting. And so as soon as I knew the song, I'm like, I've heard it. It's awesome. This isn't even, so the Eliza that we saw was definitely not full of the Sue. she was good, but like she was not full of a Sue. So I was like, oh, the blocking for this is that they're just sitting. I'm gonna go pee. So I ran down the stairs.
Quick question.
And ran back up.
So it was a preemptive pee. So it wasn't even like it snuck up on you pee. It was like I'm planning a pee here to make sure.
Yeah, this was a planned one. I had a gin and tonic from the bar, and I was like, all right. Sorry. Got a tickle in my throat. So yeah, that happened. So yeah, I don't know. It's like, God. Sorry, I'm gonna have to cut this out.
Oh no, this is going into post credits.
Oh, good.
Yep. Good times. Yep. I don't want to be the one that catches you dying on film. So.
Yeah, let's not do that.
You need a second?
Anyway.
You good?
No, I think I'm good. We'll see. I have like a tickle in my throat. I don't know where it came from.
Are you good?
I guess.
Okay. We'll see what we get.
So yeah, I don't know. But I think I have to go Daveed Diggs, and then Renee Elise Goldsberry, who's Angelica, and then I think I have to go Chris Jackson, George Washington.
Cool.
I mean, God, Leslie Odom Jr. is so good too, but for some reason, like, it's just not my favorite.
So you know what's funny? That's how I feel about Lin-Manuel Miranda.
Well, right. So we saw.
There was a moment where I was like, good thing you wrote this show so you could be in it, bro.
Yes, I mean, and he is a brilliant writer, and he's a really good actor.
Totally.
But he's not as good of a singer as everybody else.
And I love it. I love his hip hop because lyrically, it's like you can't question it. Like it's lyrical brilliance.
Yes.
Cadences are brilliant. Like all of it is brilliant. And like the tone of his voice is just something that just does not do it for me. Right? Like they're
yeah,
like,
and that's fine. Yeah, so the Hamilton that we saw was a better singer for sure. And I liked how he did some of the acting stuff a little different, and I loved it. He was really good.
Yeah, I don't think that anyone who's not phenomenal is going to get cast in Hamilton
or
anywhere in the world in Broadway, right? Like,
well,
it's
yeah.
time before the amateurs are really like trying to pull it off, right?
Right. But like you said, it's always comparing to like what you know. And so like I know the soundtrack inside and out. And so I'm comparing against that. So like
when you're like seeing it in your head and then they do it differently, and so sometimes that experience is like what the F, and then other times that experience is like, oh, that was cool.
Yeah. But mostly I'm like, that was wrong. Like when King George in the recording doesn't do the like awesome, wow. He just does it very boring in the show.
Like the one on Disney Plus, it's so good. Oh, and then I found out that his spitting is just how he is a stage actor.
Yes, which I was appalled. I truly thought that was part of the King George thing, and I was like, oh, that's so funny. And then I
did
like,
too.
Oh, that's just Jonathan Groff being Jonathan Groff.
Right, and that's what was funny was watching some of these stage actors deal with having a camera close up, and that there's a very different thing. And so, but it did play perfectly into that specific part of the song, because I was like, dude, he's playing the Mad King and he's actually like foaming at the mouth. This is amazing. And so then when I read it later, I was a little disappointed. I was a little like, oh, I thought that was affect, you know, like I thought. But yeah, so that kind of surprised me when I found that out. But his character, the way he played King George was so masterful in my opinion. And so here's the thing that I noticed too, and I haven't read anything about this, and you're more of a theater buff than I am, but it felt like his numbers were written out of like traditional old school theater style, right? So like when I listen to his songs, like it's kind of like, oh, that could have been something that you'd find in a Godspell or something that you'd find in like a Joseph, because of the style is so stark. He's the only person in the whole thing that doesn't rap.
Right.
Right.
So I read that he's a little like styled a little after like Brit rock. I mean, the music style is a little like Queen, a little like that kind of vibe.
That does that tracks for me.
Yeah. So like the British influence of yeah. But I agree. I feel like, but then so I think I think songs like Burn, which is actually one of my favorite songs in the show. It's my favorite one to sing in the car. uh, is kind of more the traditional
Which
theater.
one is Burn? I'm still getting the titles, right?
The one after the Reynolds pamphlet where she's like burning.
Oh yeah. Oh duh. Yeah. Obviously. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm taking myself out of the narrative.
Yes. So that one feels more traditional theater to me because that's kind of like her.
Well, and her thing is really a lot more traditional. Like her whole style is a lot more traditional theater.
Like, but one of the things,
like I was watching a Wicked every time she sang, right? So in Helpless, I felt that way.
That's what I was gonna say about Helpless.
I felt that way. I was like, oh, this is just like when I watched Wicked. Like this is and it made sense because she's not technically white, but like of the cast, she's the most predominantly white character in the main cast, in my opinion. So like the fact that she would have that more traditional and same thing with the King. So I kind of made those connections just in my own racial biases, right? Which was like, oh wow, so the white people don't do the rapping quite, like that's not a thing. And I can see that.
I mean, she is Asian, but
yeah. Well, and that's what I'm saying is like she's not. But I think that she in that role for sure. But like every time I see her, she certainly passes as white in an American context.
Sure.
And so so I was like, oh yeah, they don't rap as much. Theirs feels more like the traditional Broadway musical style. And so it was weird because as I was watching it, I was like, this is Broadway? I'm like, they let this thing on Broadway? And so I can't wait to see the Heights. Like I'm so excited to see the Heights.
Yeah, it's in the Heights. But
in the Heights, yeah.
Jenna actually saw that on Broadway.
Oh.
And I believe that Chris Jackson was in it when she saw it. I have to double check, but yeah, so I'm very excited to see that too, though.
I really need to show these performers more respect and really start to learn their names and stuff because I love them so much.
Yeah, I just listened to the soundtrack. Oh, but what I was going to say about Helpless, and because you were talking about before how you love the like kind of like gritty like hip hoppy stuff, and then learning stuff from this book, and then also like tying in the mixtape. So in Helpless, he said that he had like kind of envisioned it as like an Ashanti Ja Rule thing. So it's so cool that they did it on the mixtape. But he does the like, as long as I'm alive, like in the like Ja Rule style, like on purpose. And he said he just did it because it made Philippa Sue laugh. So, but I love like the little tidbits like that. Like that's where that came.
Yeah, like just those little play. I haven't peeled through it yet because I feel like it's going to consume me for a large period of time. But a friend of mine sent me a categoric list of every hip hop reference in the show. And so like there's going to be stuff in there that I definitely didn't connect, right? Because my hip hop fandom is, of a white kid in Orange County, California growing up, right? So like so for me it's like there's the ones that are super obvious, the 10 commandments, the Ashanti kind of feel of that one. And if
you don't know, now you know.
Yeah, the Biggie stuff, and the Biggie wears the AL, that's Biggie, and a lot of that different stuff. And then some of the cultural stuff, right? So, and I would watch Lin-Manuel kind of describe this in more detail, and it just really blew me away. But one of the things I noticed was that when you get the first three in the pub, you get old, like a kind of hip hop that every hip hop head has rapped to in their own, like, and when somebody says like, oh, we should freestyle, if you've never freestyled in your life, that's the kind of like rap that you go to because it's just so like, right, and so simple. And then that when he comes into that jam, that Alexander's is actually like Rakim and them is the next evolutionary advancement of hip hop itself. And so you've got like he's the future of the movement, and these guys are like the static like originators of the movement. And so it's cool for them to come together. But the way Lin-Manuel described it was that like the way he wrote the song was that they each had like full-blown stanzas all themselves. They had plenty of bars to like talk about their stuff. And then when he goes, he manages to cram those concepts into a single bar each, which it was what the evolution was. The evolution was a transformation of the complexity of depth so that you could accomplish more in a shorter period of musical time. And so like when you watch it, it's like, I'm John Lawrence in the place to be. I got 2 Sam Adams, but I'm working on 3, right? And then he comes in and he's moving at a much faster pace, and he manages to articulate the same ideas about, hey, you're about racial slavery or racial equity and the freedom of enslaved peoples, and he manages to do it in like a, he's like, hey, he's like, I think, you're like Lancelot, and I like your pants a lot, and right, and like, he manages to just encapsulate all of it in a small little puddle. And I think that shows the insane depth of nerdiness of Lin-Manuel Miranda, right?
Yep.
Because he's using musical theater, American history, and hip hop history, and he's making all of them come together in this brilliantly perfect blend to articulate something that goes so far beyond what he wrote, right? Like the experience of it. And so if you're a hip hop head, you experience it from one lens, but if you're like a musical theater head, and if you're a historical head, like if you're nerdy in one of those areas, like the way you experience it is different. And so I experienced the whole show as a hip hop head and someone who loves America, but has experienced the American education system. And so like didn't really latch on to a lot of it. I was like, oh, that's really cool. And I'm really proud to be an American because everybody tells me I'm supposed to be, right? And so now I'm like, oh man, I just have an appreciation for the founding fathers in a way that I didn't before. But because I had that interest, it was really, really cool to see these characters in like an affinity light of my hip hop style.
Yeah.
So,
Sure.
so what was your favorite, what was your favorite nuance of the show? What was something where you were like, whoa, this, like the way he put this together is insane. I mean, the whole show is that, but like, what was something that really catches your like attention?
That is a good question. I don't know that I have one that
like what hits on your nerdy nerves?
I mean, I just like all the wordplay. So like especially so I think that the reason why I like Daveed Diggs and I like Renee Elise Goldsberry like as like my top people is they're the ones who are doing like the fast rap. And so that always like blows my mind talent wise and just like and writing wise and all of it.
How much of that kind of hip hop have you been exposed to?
Not a lot, I feel like.
I would love to share some of it with you because like if you like that stuff, then there's a lot of Busta Rhymes. There's a guy named Twister.
Twista. Come on, Brian.
I don't know. I don't know who you know and what you know, but we all know.
A guy named Twister.
We know. We both know what we know.
So on the mixtape in
let's shift to mixtape for a moment.
Yeah, so in Immigrants We Get the Job Done, there's a rapper who is a Mexican woman named Snow the Product. And so that kind of got me listening to her a little bit. And then a friend of mine actually is into her and recommended her. She is so good. Sick. And I love like the mix in of Spanish too, because I have like enough that like I'll get some of it. She's phenomenal.
Yeah. Well, and so like on that, I think it was Kimberly that was telling me about that, like Lin-Manuel Miranda's wife was the one who said, hey, your women don't rap hard enough. Like
you probably did.
Like you need some of your writing for these female characters needs to hit hard like you're writing for the male characters. And so he really took that into that whole song, like the whole that whole piece where Angelica's doing the flashback. Oh, and I read this whole thing, like, so the flashback, because they did the film styling the way they did it, they were able to do like slow-mo and multiple angles changing a lot. And so it really gave the impression of like rewinding and going back in time a lot more intensely than watching it as a live show is the way that they described it.
Oh, I don't think it was, I mean, I think the way that they did it live was also incredibly impressive because they're also doing the choreography from Helpless but in reverse.
Yep.
It's unreal. So good.
Well, and like it's so funny. So then the very second time I watched it, the first thing I was asking myself was like, when did he have that conversation with Angelica? Right, because like when she tells the story, I'm like, when did that happen? So then on my second watch, I was like really watching Helpless. And then I saw like, oh my gosh, he sees Angelica before he ever sees Eliza. And Angelica sees him before Eliza sees him.
Yeah, so I had that
almost
same,
simultaneously.
I had that exact same experience listening to the soundtrack the first time through. I was like confused at first and had to like go back and listen again, like at that exact part. So that's funny that you say that. I remember.
And then, and even with all of her hints that she dropped, right? Because she's like satisfied, right? Is this huge number. And it's like, that was the crux of like the end of the abrupt ending to their first encounter. And like, it came and went so fast that I like, when she's drawing it out into this huge deal, I'm like, when did that, the pace of the show is just so damn intense, right? Um, and then when I watched it the second time, I was just blown away. And then to watch them do that choreography in reverse, right? And then to see the part in reverse where he like kind of comes out and goes in, and then to go and watch the first one. And so on the third watch, I was like, now I'm going to watch the choreography, because now I knew where the conversation happened, but I wasn't paying enough attention to the choreography specifically. And then him kind of walking in and like hanging out with her and then walking out, and it just happens like super quick. And I'm like, okay, like he definitely met her, like there he is, like hanging out with her. And then like they bring it back in and actually show that conversation. It's so good. Oh,
Yeah, I know. It's amazing.
so
But then, so what I was gonna say earlier is like talking about kind of, I don't remember what we were talking about that made me think of this, but looking at it now, kind of in the time that we're living in now with this critical eye of like, okay, so it has brought musical theater to a lot more people and made musical theater interesting to a lot more people and made history and these stories interesting. Fly. That was awful. To a
our
lot more
post-credit scene
people.
is gonna be amazing. It's just gonna be like a series of clips.
Yeah,
It's
of
gonna be
me like doing dumb stuff. And
so that's so good.
so, but looking at it now with a critical eye of like, okay, well, so all of these people like enslaved other humans, and I mean, so, and I think it does an okay job of being like, okay, these are real humans that existed with flaws and they were petty and they like did all this stuff. Um, but I still think there's more that needs to happen in the public eye, and maybe not like for these people to do per se, but just of like making just a change to the way that we've learned history in general. And so
There
like
should
this
be
is
no American history that's taught absent of the direct influences of the slave trade, in my
right.
opinion. Like every time you teach any aspect of American history, it should have a relationship lens that teaches, like, so George Washington entered the fray. He was a general and a slave owner who had a plantation with this many people on it, which he kept for this period of time, and
Right.
himself had, and like, I think that's what it means to have a racial equity lens on the way we teach history in this country, right? Is that the compelling aspects of the narrative have to be reiterated nonstop throughout the whole historical retelling, right?
Yeah.
Because I
I
think
mean,
it's unavoidable.
yeah. I mean, and something that blew my mind was when we went to the African American History and Culture Museum in DC, and just like understanding the magnitude of like the horror and like the death, and like understanding that it was equal, if not greater, to the Holocaust, which we spend weeks on in school, and like weeks on multiple years of school. And the fact that that I didn't know that
So
until
we
I
learn
was
more about the politics of the Civil War than we do about the history of the transatlantic slave trade, right?
absolutely.
And so I've been to the museum. My wife and I are contributors, where we every year we renew our membership to contribute to the museum. And so I've been through all three levels of that portion of the museum 6 times now. And I have yet to make it to the end, right? Like I can't say that I've actually absorbed it.
Yeah.
But every single time I cry. And so I think it's important for us to like recognize that this has brought a lot of really important conversations forward, because I think Lin-Manuel Miranda would be an astounding human to tell historical stories in this format about enslavement and slavery, that would be empowering, but also honest and impactful. And I would kill to see how he would tell some of those stories in this kind of a format, and using hip hop, which is a black American tradition of music that is one of the few traditions of music that is uniquely American and hasn't been co-opted entirely. And I say entirely because it has been co-opted.
Yeah.
But we don't attribute it, right? Like we attribute
Right.
rock and roll to white people.
Yeah, even though it's not.
We attribute, and you can't do that with hip
Right.
hop. It's not a fucking thing, right? But I think that's really pertinent. And I think this show does a real good job at trying to romanticize a little bit, right? The relationship between Alexander and John Lawrence. And
the work that they did against slavery, but
it brought poignance to John Lawrence's death, right? Like it brought potency to the idea that like that was someone who in absolutely under no uncertain circumstances believed that if they were going to be a free country that they had to free every single on their sovereign land.
Yeah.
And so I think that's cool because I don't think he gets a lot of historical prominence.
No.
I would love to see him taught a whole lot more in our education system.
Yeah, I don't think I'd heard of him before Hamilton.
Nope, until Hamilton came around, I had no clue who he was. Just like when I watched the Lincoln. So when I watched Lincoln, the film, I had never heard of Thaddeus, right? He's my fucking hero of that entire story now. Like, if there was anybody in that story that I would have hoped I would have been in history, it would have been him. And even he had to bend to the will of white supremacy in order to make substantial gains for the sake of equity and equality. And so it's just a really powerful reminder of that. And I wish that Lin-Manuel would have been a little bit more attentive to that, but I think it did bring it to the surface for discussion in this era, that because it's been popularized while this movement is happening, that critique, I don't think is like a, you did it wrong. And for me, I think it's like a, hey, cool, but let's have this conversation. And he never shies away from it. Like he doesn't like try to defend his portrayals, right? Like he's very, very aware.
Yeah, and so on the mixtape, which I had kind of forgotten, there are some like demos of songs that were kind of gonna be in it and then got cut, or pieces of it made it in.
The John Adams one.
Maybe,
but
yeah,
I think the John Adams one is one that was like not who it was performed by.
Oh, the letter.
Yeah.
Which is so good.
Good on the mixtape.
So there is one about, it's like another cabinet battle where they're talking about ending slavery, and so they're having that conversation, and they literally decide to like wait to end it because of like the financial implications. And so Lynn is definitely, I mean, obviously aware of the story and like tried to like work as many pieces in as possible, but I think truthfully made that decision because he like couldn't give it the like full weight.
You could, and that's the critique, right? Is that like he wanted to recognize it, he wanted to acknowledge it, but he didn't want to get into it. But then the way that he acknowledged it romanticized it a little bit beyond what it actually was. And so I feel for that. Well, and in the mixtape, my favorite song on the mixtape is I Wrote My Way Out. Nas is one of the greatest, period, of all time. And his, like in that rap, he really describes what his contributions to hip hop were and what his lens was. And it really showed how like someone who's really telling a very, very, very like local story of just about like, this is what it is here. This is us. We're not trying to fit into like what you think is popular. We're telling our story. And I think Wrote My Way Out is like on the mixtape is I run that thing through the dirt, which is why I haven't heard some of the other songs on the mixtape quite as much. Right. But I think the mixtape is worth the listen. If you're a fan of the show Hamilton, even if you're not a hip hop fan, it's worth listening to because there's so many great, interpretations of those same songs or concepts and ideas on the mixtape. They're so good. So we're approaching what has to be at least an hour, I think. And I think it's clear that we could be talking a lot longer.
Well, I was going to say, to touch on one of my other subjects, I did look up, and Hamilton was a Capricorn.
Okay.
I want you to know that.
Well, my friends are like, I've got, so Reverend Masato Hiroka and his wife, Rebecca Hiroka, especially his wife, Rebecca, are really into the Enneagram. And so we
Oh
were trying
yeah.
to like decide like what Enneagrams some of these guys were. And so like I'm an 8 in the Enneagram, and it is so absolutely undeniable that I'm an 8 in the Enneagram that even if I tried to make a case for another one, it would be impossible. And so we kind of feel Hamilton is definitively an 8 in the Enneagram. So if anybody's wondering, Hamilton's 8. But my friend said that he feels like, so Masato says he feels like John Lawrence was also an 8. And so now I'm trying to get into John Lawrence more and like see like if I really vibe with him more. I mean, and truly the thing that got me into hip hop was actually R&B. So the first time I ever heard Boys to Men, I felt like my life had transformed. Like my entire life had changed. I had heard a kind of music that felt more real to me than any other music I'd ever heard. And the reason I like John Lawrence's character so much, and especially the damn me for not knowing his freaking name, the actor who portrays him.
Anthony Ramos.
What, Anthony Ramos? Anthony Ramos's voice, like the tenor of his voice, is so R&B specific, and so like when he does the in the story of tonight, and when he's like raise a glass to freedom, and there's one note in there where he holds on to it, and right after that he goes, it's raise a glass.
Never take away.
But it's not that part. It's
no matter what they tell you.
And when he holds the U, the way that he holds the U is like the most insanely R&B
Yeah.
Like every time I listen to it, I get chills because his voice is so good there.
Yeah. So you know he's going to be the main character in the Heights.
Oh, he's going to be the main character in the Heights?
Yeah.
Ah! I'm so excited.
Yeah. And so I also looked up John Lawrence, and he's a Scorpio, or he was a Scorpio.
Scorpio? So, that makes sense. I think you're trying to bait me here, so I'm gonna try and dodge the bullet because
no, it's all good. We're not.
I know we can bust me real quick. My whole life, I am a Taurus. I am on the cusp, so I'm on the 20th, May 20th, 1980, which makes me a Zennial. Number one, and number two puts me on the cusp between Taurus and Gemini, which is not even real because Neil deGrasse Tyson has already taught me that those constellations aren't even remotely where they were when those ideas were put together.
Yeah, but that's not the point. It's not astronomy, it's astrology. So it's different. It's the way that the sky split up. I was reading about this because everyone's talking about like NASA discovered like a 13th blah, blah, blah. But like that doesn't affect it because it's not based on, so the names of the signs are constellations, but it's based on like a grid that, or not a grid, I mean it's a circle, but divided into 12 pieces of where things were, planets and stars and stuff.
You're very passionate about this.
So it doesn't actually depend on where the constellations are.
I gave Leah all my numbers. I gave Leah the time, the place, the date, the whole 9 yards, and she says that I'm a Gemini.
You totally are. So personality-wise, you are definitely more Gemini than you are Taurus.
Really?
I think, yes.
This goes to show how much I don't actually know about it, right? I've been like a proud Taurus forever just because that's what I was. Because being on the cusp was kind of interesting, but none of it actually has any depth of meaning for me.
No, and it's all good. It's really just fun.
Enneagram does. I have to tell you that like what I learned about the fact that I have an Enneagram number 8 has absolutely blown my mind. It's so insanely accurate to who I am as a human being. But what makes me a Gemini? What is it that makes me such a Gemini?
So Geminis are very social for sure. And I feel like you
because
kind of
I'm
have
like a big towering monster that always is raging but also has a super soft underbelly or something.
Well, it is kind of like that. So you kind of do have two modes where it's like,
I definitely do.
Go, and then it's like, yes, join me in this affirmative prayer. Like, and sometimes they go together. I mean, for sure. But like, but I don't think that the like duality of personalities, I don't want to say it like that, of Gemini is necessarily a bad thing. There's no bad signs. And also there's other placements that affect your personality. I'm pretty sure you had Leo in there, which makes perfect sense. Leos are like, hello, I'm the star. Yes, talk to me. Hello. So definitely. But also Leos have that kind of like, well, Leo's a fire sign. So it has that energy to it. And then also, so when you're talking about I don't know a whole lot about Enneagrams, but I think you and I have the same Myers-Briggs. And so I think that kind of embodies some like Leo energy too.
Well, there was another test I did forever ago, and I can't remember which one it was, and I got the title of Field Marshal. And I was the only person in the whole room of like 80 people who got that particular.
Yeah, you're a leader.
I like to think I am. I hope I am.
I mean, but that's your personality, that's your desire, that's your like affinity. Like it's just that it just is you.
Well, and low key, one of the greatest compliments I ever got from your husband was after you and I went to Baltimore for that thing. And so Leah and I were, if you watch some of my live stuff on Facebook, Leah and I went to Baltimore to be part of one of the earliest marches that were happening down there after George Floyd. And we were at this place where we were doing it in cars, and we were at this intersection that was just a clusterfuck. And so we were dead stopped in traffic while this other part of traffic is fully flowing and moving. And we're like, what's going on? So I got out of the car. Leah's still like hanging out by the car in case the cars start moving. They never did start moving. So then I finally am like, I'm going to work upstream and see what's going on here. And I get to this intersection. I'm like, this is stupid. So then I just start directing traffic. So I'm up there just directing traffic. And then Leah comes and I'm like, hey, just park in the middle of the intersection. No one's going to hit you because I'm telling them where to go. So you just park right here. So now Leah's like in the intersection. She's kind of like, is this where I'm supposed to be? What are we doing? And then a brigade of cops, there was probably 4 cop cars, come tearing into the intersection. And they pull right up to me. And I'm like, I think I'm about to get in a fight with a cop. And the dude gets out. Sure. Yeah, 100%. I was like, well, we're about to fight the cops today. And I felt bad because I was like, I knew you were sitting in the intersection watching. And I was like, this is not going to be good. And then the cop, and God bless Baltimore for who they've shown up as. I think Freddie Gray taught us a lot. And so this guy gets out of the car and he comes flying out of the car and towards my general direction. And so I like take that one step back, like, here we go. And then he stops. And then he doesn't even acknowledge me at first. I'm like looking around and I'm like, sorry, I was just kind of helping direct traffic. He's like, yeah, it's cool. We got it. And then we were gone. And so that happened. And so when we're done with the whole thing, because Leah had to go to the bathroom, we get back to Leah's house. And when we get back to Leah's house, Randy says, we were telling him the story, and Randy says, well, yeah, if you're going to fucking lead, right? And I felt like, oh man, what a cool like compliment, right? That someone sees that in me and just like that just makes sense. Like there's nothing about that story to him that seemed even remotely out of place, right? And I was like, that's really cool. So I don't know how we got here, but that was a fun moment.
We're talking about zodiac sign.
Oh yeah, we're talking about zodiac. We're talking about how I'm a Gemini and not Taurus.
No, yeah, but you're a leader. It's true. And I mean, no, I was gonna say something that is not. It's not equal at all. So I'm not even gonna go there.
All right. Okay. That's going in the post credits. Like your post credits gonna be almost as long as the regular video. I think.
Oh my god, I know. I'm a writer. I'm not a speaker. I never claimed to be a speaker.
Why we have such a great team, because I am a speaker and not a writer. Like when I write things and people who are writers or readers try to read what it is that I'm saying, they always understand what I'm saying through a depth of frustration and angst and anger that I don't even understand because I don't get it. But like Leah has read my writings and I'm sure has been like, yes, I get what you're saying. And look, so I think that's part of our magic too. So anyways,
dream team.
Like what? Step to this. Yeah, they're going to tell stories about this night.
Yes.
I was talking to somebody. I was like, we need those leaders now. Like we need that group to show up, but they would have to be a multicultural, multi-gender identity group. Like what would it be like to have maybe not even 4 people, maybe like 8 people that led the next movement that were coming out of all the different intersections. Like I can't wait to find out who those people end up being as we move through this, so that Lin-Manuel Miranda can write a whole show about those folks.
Yes.
So, and I don't think I would love to be in the ensemble. That's all I'm asking. I would like let me be, or somebody that gets mentioned that like walks up to one of them and says some dope shit and walks away. Like let me find my way into that piece of history if I can do it. So
Yes,
anyway,
I would
so
love to be in the ensemble. First of all, I would love to be in the ensemble of Hamilton. And when I was doing the like, I was on Twitter watching the live stream, and one of the women who's in the ensemble, actually, she was in it when I saw it, said during I keep not coming up with the name of the song. That would be enough. During that song, she's like, "This is when the ensemble went pee," and I was like, "That's when I went pee during the show. This is the closest I've ever been to being on the ensemble because I can't dance like that."
you had a sixth sense about what it would mean to be in the show and to time your bathroom break. That's magical. Well, thanks for joining us. Leah, thanks for saying yes to this. I think we're going to have a lot more conversations. And I hope we have a lot more conversations. And I think we'll get Randy together and we'll talk with the both of you at the same time, because watching the two of them together is a thing that I love. And I think, maybe we'll pull together that Pekoski clan conversation too at some point and find a topic that makes sense for all of us to goof on. But I'm so grateful for all the time that you spent with me today. I'm so grateful that you said yes to being on camera. You are a writer, a brilliant writer. Go check out her writing. It's in the link will be in the description. And coming out of your shell and being a speaker, I know is not as hard for you as you might have described it earlier, but it's not your main lane. And so I just appreciate you saying yes to coming out and goofing off with me for a little bit. And with that in mind, check out Leah's stuff. The way that she writes is so authentic and so relevant and so current that I think, I want all of you to help me encourage her to write more, because the world needs her voice right now. And my voice comes through when I use it in speaking, and her voice comes through so brilliantly when she uses it in writing. And so I just love you. I appreciate you. And thank you so much for hanging out today. And we will catch you next time. Peace.
Wait, you didn't do the like. Do you have one last thing that you?
Oh shit! Yeah, you busted me. I always let the guest have the closing word because I talk so fucking much. So yes, Leah, would you please tell the people what you want them to know?
Yes. Are you ready? You're not ready, actually.
Oh.
Ready? So this is what it feels like to match wits with someone at your level. What the hell is the catch? It's the feeling, the freedom of seeing the light. It's Ben Franklin with the key and the kite. You see it, right? Conversation lasted 2 minutes, maybe 3 minutes. Everything we said in total agreement. It's a dream and it's a bit of a dance, a bit of a posture. It's a bit of a stance. He's a bit of a flirt, but I'm gonna give it a chance. I asked about his family. Did you see his answer? His hands started fidgeting. He looked askance. He's penniless. He's flying by the seat of his pants.
Yes. Oh my God, if you'd have let me get out of this without that moment, I'd have killed myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't let you, don't worry.
Hey, I'm just getting started, and my own format is still new to me. So thank you so much. That was dope as fuck. You were right. I was not ready for that, and it was magnificent. So thank you for being with me today. Thank you so much for who you are, and I'm looking forward to next time.
Yay.
Peace.
Okay, bye.
What up? Reverend Brian here again, and this is the end of the video where I ask you, if you like this content, like and share it. And if you subscribe to it, that would be amazing. And most importantly, if you want to be notified every time I upload a new video, just click that bell and YouTube will make sure that you never miss a single one. Thank you so much for supporting my work. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. And I'm just knowing that something amazing is unfolding in your life right now. Peace. Okay.